So you're aware we're going to be putting this up on the website. So if you need to watch it afterwards and review things, that is no problem to do whatsoever. Looks like we're about ready to go. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming by today. I do have you all muted to start off with, but if you do have any questions or you want me to re-review something, anything like that, just put some notes in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on that to make sure that we're covering everything that we want to cover. Just to do I just did it, but a quick review again today, what we're going to be discussing. We're going to talk about figuring out what kind of items in your servicing module or the inventory module need service schedules, how to set up categories and subcategories to build the actual schedules for items, how to deal with service schedules versus service types and how those two talk to each other, the process for generating server or service logs and what that looks like. We'll also be talking about how the service module through inventory is going to generate reports and notifications for you and the various different reports that you can run off of that information. I'm also going to be showing you how to do batch updates for updating services, service logs, and discuss some of the other integrations that we have available, things like barcode scanners you can use on the workbench or just slightly different user interfaces. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover today. As usual, this is a training session for your benefit. So if you have questions, please do ask me and just put a note in the chat and I will do my best to cover everything. If you have stuff that's sort of generally related to FirePro but isn't specifically related to the topic at hand today, just put a note in there and we can discuss it at the end of the session when I have let everybody else go back to their day jobs. Okay, so when we talk about inventory servicing, normally we're talking about things that have to happen for inventory items on a regular basis. One of the best examples of that is something like hydrostatic testing for air bottles. It needs to be done on a very regular basis. Calibration of gas detectors is also a good example of sort of things that need to happen on a very regular basis. And FirePro has a series of tools built into it that allow you to schedule those kind of service items, receive reminders, notifications, and reports on when that servicing is due, and also document and update the fact that servicing has been done. So pretty much all of that is done through the inventory module in the program. And usually what you're going to do before you get into very heavy duty creation of service schedules and service records is give a think about what kind of inventory items you want to be creating and putting in here for service record management. A big part of that is considering, does this particular inventory item already have an existing spreadsheet or maintenance log or paper logbook that we're using to keep track of the servicing on it? Also, is this part of a class of items that have a very specific set of service requirements? So if we look at this particular department's database, for example, we can see that they have broken up their SCBA category into an aluminum bottles and a carbon bottles subcategory. Now, they're both air bottles, but broadly speaking, those two types of items have different servicing requirements, so they are set up as separate subcategories in here. And then we're gonna take a look at why that's happening like that. But it's usually pretty important to have a big picture think about what are my priorities for documenting items, and also how deep in the weeds do I want to get in terms of detailed inventory records. We have departments who certainly do every single turnout, coat, and pant. Some departments, though, will set up the turnout suit as a single item because it's generally not going to be separatable and will be serviced together. So you want to consider how much detail you want to go into. Likewise, you also might want to think about, like, do I want to create separate inventory records for every single length of hose that I have? That might be a bit too optimistic a thought, depending on who you've got available and how much data entry time you have. You always want to bear in mind that anything that you build in here is going to be something that you need to maintain. So it's a good idea to be as cold-eyed about it as possible in terms of, like, is this going to give me, positive, useful results for the time that I put in? So when I am looking at servicing schedules, there's pretty much two interlinked pieces of information or tabs in an inventory record that deal with service schedule. And those are the service schedule and service records tabs. We can think of the service schedule as a when is this due piece, and the service records as a what have we done piece, a documentation that things actually happened. So those two things can interact and work together, but generally speaking, the service schedule is going to determine when is this supposed to happen, and the service records log what actually happened. It's important to know that the service records themselves don't necessarily have to be service schedule items. You can have a whole range of other service records documenting other servicing done. If you want to do that, that is no problem at all. But the two pieces are generally built together. So whenever we look at an inventory item in general, an inventory item is normally going to have a category. Categories are pretty much just used for sorting and organizing inventory items. So, you're going to be able to create a variety of different categories, which are your big picture looks. These can be used for filtering, for sorting, if you want to run reports on certain classes of equipment, or differentiate between certain classes of equipment for things like splitting up responsibilities. Inventory categories is going to be a really big way to do it. That's the biggest picture breakdown for your inventory. Below the category, we have subcategories. So inventory items can be assigned to specific subcategories, and you can have as many subcategories within a particular inventory category as we want. We can see that there are a whole range of different subcategories set up in the SCBA category here. And subcategory is actually where we build the service schedule and the service records for each item. So this is a really good example of when we are building subcategory. If we have several different classes of item within that bigger category that might be similar but have different servicing requirements, or that we want to differentiate for things like report tracking and stuff like that, then we might create separate subcategories for it. So in this case, we can see there's an aluminum bottles subcategory, a carbon bottles subcategory, a cascade system, compressor system bottles category, and the fiberglass bottles as well. So this gives us the ability to break down in some detail different classes of items. Likewise, we can see that in the PPE section, where we've got things like turnout coats and turnout pants as separate items, helmets as separate subcategories. This allows us to differentiate those items and build different servicing requirements for them if we want to do that. So whenever I have a subcategory in the system, and we'll use the carbon bottles subcategory as a good example here, I have a fair bit of information down at the bottom about the subcategory itself. So the first thing we see on here is what we call default linking. So a default linking structure means that you can set a particular piece of gear, a particular subcategory. So every piece of gear that gets assigned to that subcategory to an automatic linking type. So for example, if we are looking at apparatuses, anything that goes in the engine subcategory is automatically going to be flagged as an apparatus in FirePro, which means it's drivable, it shows up on the truck chart, all that kind of stuff. Likewise, you can do something in the way of PPE, where you can say anything in the turnout code subcategory can be attached to personnel records. And one of the cool things about this is that this also works retroactively. So if you assign a default linking, it'll ask you if you want to set the linking type automatically. And if I say yes, it'll actually go through, find all the turnout code records and flag them as these are items that you can attach to a personnel record, for example. Now with carbon bottles, we don't have to worry about default linking because these normally are not going to be specifically attached to anything else. I will say that I have seen some departments who set up their bottles as linkable to incidents, and then in the process of creating an incident report, they will attach that bottle so that it creates a more detailed usage history. That's normally something I would only advocate if you're already keeping track of that information somehow, as opposed to adding it to your to-do list. But what also happens is that each subcategory has a service schedule and a service types set attached to it. So if I click on the service schedule, this is where I go to build the servicing requirements for this particular class of item. In this case, we can have as many different scheduled services as we want. It is important to remember that for each individual item, FirePro won't start tracking and giving you reminders and notifications until you've actually put at least one service date in for that class of service. So you can have a bunch of service schedule items, but not necessarily use all of them on every inventory item. Now, in this case, we've got a hydrostatic testing schedule. So this is set up for a 60-month period and a 6-month advance notice. Now, the period just is going to essentially set how frequently this servicing needs to be done. How often is it due? The advance notice controls how far in advance of that scheduled date the reminders module and then by extension some of the other reports are going to start to generate notifications for you. And we're going to talk about sort of how that reminder structure works a little bit more as we get a little farther in here. But pretty much what you want to think about is advance notice is going to set how far in advance of the due date reminders about this particular scheduling are going to start popping up through the reminders queue in Fire. And generally, obviously, you want to set that for longer or shorter, depending on how much time it actually takes to get something done. In this case, we've got a 60-month period, a 5-year period for hydrostatic testing, and 6 months advance notice because you have to plan on it. We also have an air changeout, which is set to happen once a year and 1 month advance notice. And then there's an annual servicing requirement, likewise, every 12 months with a 1 month advance notice. So any inventory item that I assign to the carbon bottles subcategory is automatically going to get this structure of servicing requirements. Each individual item is going to have its own dates, but the individual schedule is always going to be the same. So if I go in now and create a brand new inventory item, and I say, okay, we're in the SCBA category, I'm going to assign it as a carbon bottle. And say, okay, this is, it's in station 5 somewhere, normally with things like carbon bottles, air bottles. I don't normally advocate selecting a very specific location for it because they move around most of the time. Code, I could say it's actually we'll just call it C99 in there. It is normally a good idea in the code or the item name to be as obviously descriptive as you can, just to be friendly to whoever has to take over this after you. None of this other information is particularly critical in the context of service scheduling, but obviously for some other uses like tracking when gear is expiring or figuring out things like manufacture date, that can be helpful. But in this case, I've saved this item, and now when I go onto the service schedule tab, I have a service schedule. Now in this case, my window is actually dropped a little bit below the bottom, so I'm just going to double click on the bar at the top to maximize the screen. And when I click on my hydrostatic testing item, down at the bottom, I can see I've got a last service date a schedule, and a service due. So if I never enter a last service date here, the software will never start tracking any reminders or notifications for this particular type of servicing for this particular item. Now, in this case, I want to get started on that. If this is a brand new inventory item, I might not have done any hydrostatic testing previously. In that case, what I would normally do is put the manufacture date in the last service, or the purchase date if I don't have a manufacture date for it. Likewise, with something like annual service, if I haven't done servicing on it before, I would normally just put in my purchase date here. And what we'll do is put in 9/20 of 22, just to get us started. So as soon as I put in a date, the system's automatically going to generate a service due date for me. And this is the date that the servicing is due. The notifications might well appear before this based on whatever you set up when you set up the service schedule. So I'm going to do one for each of those, just to get us started so we can see 9/20 of 2018, which, wow, already that's 5 years. Wow. So once I save these and I have some service due dates in here, the software is going to do a number of things for you automatically at this point. So the first thing that it's going to do is it will populate these service due dates in any of the reports that you might want to run related to service due information. So for example, if I wanted to do a quick search and say, let me see all the inventory items that I have that need servicing this month, I can just go into the inventory list window, use the printer button on the right-hand side, and select the scheduled service report. This report is immediately going to ask me what date range are we looking for services on? And I could say this year, or this month even. So we can set that up. And as soon as I hit the printer button, I'm going to get a list of all the inventory items that have scheduled service this month. So we can see right away, we've got carbon bottles. This item requires an air change out, an annual service, and a hydrostatic testing. A couple of items require those. So this report can allow you to really quickly generate a list of, here's all the stuff that needs servicing over any particular time period. Can be a good thing to go into an officers meeting with, or if you're talking to your crew about what needs to get done. This kind of report can be a really quick way of generating a list about what needs to happen. What you can also do is that the setting up that servicing schedule will create reminders for you in the reminders module. This is just going to happen automatically as part of setting up the service schedule. And doing the reminders can also be a good way of populating a fairly automated workflow about things that need to happen. So if I go into the reminders tool, I can actually go in and say, if I look for a specific type of reminder, in this case, I'm going to look for inventory service record reminders, and I hit the magnifying glass and say, give me the stuff that's due fairly soon. I am going to see, as far as my August 20th or thereabouts, a variety of reminders about stuff that is due. So what's going to happen here is that the software, when you have a service schedule date, FirePro actually has two different dates that are associated with every reminder. So one date is the notification date, which is the date that it is going to pop up in your particular service log, right? So my notice, what I would call my notice date. And then there's the due date, which is when this is due. So in the case of the annual service and the air change, I set those to get a notification date 1 day in advance, or 1 month in advance of when the actual servicing is due. So I'm going to see these pop up with a notification date of August 20th and a due date of September 20th. So when we look at the the reminder module in general, the reminder module the default that it's set to do is show me everything that has a notification date of today or earlier. And so basically it's designed to say everything that I need to get notified on based on, the specific notification date is going to pop up in pretty much chronological order of when the notification date is. So stuff will start to automatically appear on your reminder list based on the notification period that you set. And that's one of the things that you build when you're putting the scheduled service together. And in this case, we can see we've got air changeouts that are due, and I would have to go back a fair bit further to find the hydrostatic testing, because in this case, I asked for 6-month notification on hydrostatic tests. Now, you can also filter these reminders by specific subcategory, so show me only SCBA items, or even by individual subcategory, show me only my carbon bottle items. So all of a sudden I have a much more detailed list of specific items and when those things need to happen. Air changes are due for a lot of different items. So, this is going to give us the ability to look in quite a bit of detail about different classes of item and get reminders on those. I am also going to do a quick review of how to set these reminders up so that the software can email them to you directly. But a lot of the time, just setting it up with a standard reminder is at least going to give you a notification. If you want to go to the individual item, you just double click on the reminder and it'll bring up the specific inventory item and the servicing requirement that generated it. So we're going to be able to see that kind of stuff appear pretty quickly and easily. So the basic structure here is that you can set up these service schedules. It will give you notifications and reminders and allow you to run searches on when the service is due. The other half of the servicing cycle is documenting that you actually did the servicing. It's great to get a notification, but if nothing actionable happens on it, then not so good. So that is where the service records side comes in. So if we look at the subcategory again, we can see there is a service schedule and service types option. So if I click on service types, I'm going to get a list of various different servicing that I can do on this particular class of item. And you can build this list dynamically while you're actually logging the servicing, but a lot of the time I like to give it a little thought and put it in advance. And the thing about these service types is that the service types can either be linked directly to schedules, or they can be standalones. So, for example, I could say, we'll do one called visual inspection. I should take caps off. So in this case, we can say, I've got a visual inspection servicing. It does not count as any of the full service schedules, but I want to be able to document that I did one, for example. So some of these can be completely standalone, just used for documentation to identify what was done and who did it. Some of them can be linked to specific service schedules. So in this case, I can say an annual service is actually linked to both the air changeout and the annual service schedule. I am doing an air change and it counts as an annual service when I do one of these services. So that's going to allow me to, in some detail, automatically update my schedules when these things are logged. It's usually a good idea to try to have your service types line up pretty well with what you're tasking people to do. That's easier to understand and easier to document. So in this case, if I log that an annual service was done, it will update the air changeout and the annual schedule service. So in this case, I can go in and say, okay, carbon bottle. If I have just a one-off, I'm only doing servicing on one individual item, then it's often simplest to just go in and create a service record manual. So in this case, I could say for each service record, we can put in information like the cost, how much it cost me to do this. For apparatuses, we can put in things like engine and pump hours for documentation purposes. I can then document what type of service I did, if I did it or if a contractor did it, which specific personnel record was involved in doing that. And if I want to have comments, I can do it, and I can just go ahead and save this. So this is going to update the service schedules on this class of item to the new dates. And that's going to allow you to pretty quickly roll forward information about what needs to happen here. That'll update reminders. It will roll forward notifications and update reports automatically. Now, the reality of the situation is most of the time with this kind of stuff, you're not doing one item at a time. You're doing a range of different items. So if that's the case, then there's a tool built into the inventory module that allows you to do batch updates of both service records and service schedules. And that tool is built in the red toolbox at the top of the inventory list window and is called Update Service Information from any inventory items. So, for example, if we are coming back from a call and we are doing post-use servicing on all of our carbon bottles, right? Do a review, do an air flip on them. I can then grab as many of these as I want. In this case, I'm just holding down the control key and then hit add to list. So these are all the bottles that we used. I can identify that we did an air change out for this, or indeed, I can also add a full service record here and say that we did a full post-use service on these two. As of this date, again, I can put in cost if I want to. I can also put in which officer was in charge, or person was in charge of that. I will also show you where this some of these lists come from. So if I want to put in comments, I can do that. What I can also do here if I want to is if I have some specific items which have failed through testing. Say, for example, we're doing hose testing and I've got half a dozen hoses that all failed. I can select those hoses, put in that they did a hose test, and retire the items at the same time. That'll automatically flag them as being retired and takes them out of service. So that can be a good way to quickly flag a bunch of items and say, not part of the department anymore. In this case, I won't do that, but we can go ahead and save. It's going to say we're going to update all these items. So now if I go back and look at C99, I'm going to be able to see that our service record has been updated with a post-use servicing. It's got the person that did it on there, and we have a service schedule notification that's going to show us, we have our service dates updated for the air change. We've rolled forward to the new service date, and that's going to roll our reminders forward, push everything forward. So the basic structure of setting up the service schedule, getting notifications that servicing needs to happen, and then using the service records or the service record entry tool to log this stuff is going to be your standard circle of service maintenance documentation. And we've tried to put in these tools to make it relatively fast to document. Now, speaking of relatively fast to document, there are a couple of other tools that we have available in FirePro if people are interested. So one of those tools is what we call the inventory service scanning tool. So the inventory service scanner is designed to be set up on a laptop or a tablet, a Windows tablet at this point, and have it put right on the workbench with a barcode scanner. The barcode scanner is a bit optional, but usually with a barcode scanner tied into it. And you can use any kind of sort of general USB plug-in scanner. What happens here is that FirePro is automatically set up with our barcode scanner integration to look at the serial numbers that you have on items. And what you're able to do is just put in your ID number and then barcode scan the individual item. I don't have a scanner actually plugged into my computer, although I do have one here in the office, but essentially that allows you to pick an item really quickly by just barcode scanning it, and it will bring up a notification that says, here's the item that we're dealing with. Here is the various different servicing that you might be able to do on this particular item, and it is actually going to show me if any of these servicings, if they're tied to service requirements, if they're past due. Those would show in red if the servicing was overdue, so you could get a quick notification. But in this case, if you're just doing a post-use service, you just click on post-use service, It's going to document a timestamp. You save that. And now your inventory item has been updated with a new service record, a new post-use servicing as of today with the person that scanned it, and the service schedule has been updated with the new air change out date that we just generated. So the idea is that this will flow stuff forward. This will also automatically update any of those reminders in there. Changing any of the service schedules will clear the previous reminder and bring a new one forward so that those service record reminders are kept up to date. So that's all kind of automated in that process. That tool also has a neat plugin to it if you are using the checklists, the custom checklists module for Fireproof. If you're doing that, then you can set up specific servicing checklists for each inventory item. And so, for example, if I look down at the harness inventory item type, if I look at the subcategory there, I have under my service types the ability to attach a specific checklist to a specific type of service. So basically what we're saying here is when I do this type of service, I want this checklist to pop up. And there's a couple of different ways that that checklist can be popped up. So one of them is you can just be in the inventory module, create a new service record and document that. And it's going to prompt you right away. Hey, there's a checklist. Do you want to do that now? And it will give you here's all the different things that I need to do on that checklist. I can document who I am. I can go in through each item, identify, are we good? Are we good? Are we good? Straps extend, no. I can say straps jam. And this tool has the ability to create an inventory defect right out of the checklist. So hit create defect. It's going to identify what piece of gear I'm attaching this to, and it will add a defect log to the system for me. So this is going to allow me to really quickly go through and I can finish this checklist off. This checklist can also be popped up through the barcode scanner tool. So if I am going into a barcode scanner, I can say, who am I? What piece of gear am I doing? Again, you normally just scan the item. I think harnesses have this. Right. So now one of the items I have in here is my in-service checklist or after service use. If I click on one of those, it's going to pop that relevant checklist up automatically puts in the date, automatically puts in the officer, and I can go through and do something very similar in terms of quickly going in and creating a defect if there's a problem so that I have a log. And this is going to keep that checklist history attached to the specific inventory item in question. So if I go in, I can look at checklist logs and see a history of a whole raft of in-service checklists on. So this can be a good way to also integrate the actual process of doing the servicing directly into the system in a way that kind of flows more or less automatically through as you put that in. So those are the sort of standard tool integrations. Now, another thing that you can set up in the system is FirePro is able to email notifications for reminders to specific groups of people. And inventory servicing is often one where that can come in handy. I do recommend being a little careful with it because it is a computer, so it'll take you very seriously. So if you say, like, I want to get an email for every service date for all my hoses, and it's hose test week, it'll send you 800 emails about each individual length of hose, which may not be where you want to live. So be a bit careful when you decide what you want to set this up for. But in order to set up an email reminder, the first thing you need to do is in the email section, you need to create what we call an email template. So an email template is a pre-selected group of people or some rules for groups of people about who should get this particular type of notification. In this case, I've already set up one called inventory servicing. Often you're going to have several different templates for inventory servicing. potentially one for different stations. Potentially, you might have different templates for different groups of people who are responsible for different classes of inventory item within the department. One, truck captains, for example. But what you need to do is on the recipients tab, give it a name that makes it recognizable. And then on the recipients tab, you can identify as many different recipients for this as you want. When you're setting up recipients, you have a couple of different rules that you can use. So one is you can create what we would call a manual recipient, which is just a specific person. Just put in their email address. That tends to be a bit of a heavy club kind of way. You can also select a specific personnel record that lets you pick an individual person or multiple individual people if you want to do that. And that will pop them into this reminder list as well. Just for clarification, that email address that it uses is the email address from the email section on the individual personnel record. So that's where that comes from in the correspondence bit. So you can put individual people on there, but what you can also do with these templates is you can build some rules about who you want to get this thing. And so there's a couple of really useful rule options. One is you can do personnel from a station, personnel from a squad, personnel from a rank. But I like to use what we call a personnel group. So when we are looking at personnel records, we can go in and say for each individual person on the employment tab, there's a groups option. And the groups are completely customizable, and you can attach as many people to each group as you want. So you could say, I am going to, see companies assigned to this particular class of item in this station, or I have a group called truck captains, or whoever you want to set up in a group like that. So what that lets you do is that when you are building a template, you can say, I want this template to go to all the truck captains. And so what'll happen is that as soon as the system tries to send this emails using this template, it'll just go through and say, who's a truck captain right now? Send the email to them. That way you don't have to continually manage the email templates to make sure that the right people are getting email. You can just build it to be a little more automated. In any event, once you have a template built, then you can go to the setup menu and select the option called email reminder settings. There is a whole video on email reminder settings if you want to get a catch up on that. But if I select email reminder settings, I can create a variety of different rules for what type of emails I want to send out. So in this case, I can create one call for inventory service record reminders. I can tie these to specific stations, and I can tie them to specific categories and subcategories of inventory. So I can say this particular, email is for this station for SCBA specifically, right? So I could have several different reminder rules for different classes of item or different stations, depending on how I keep things organized. And then I just need to pick what template and a start date. This start date is going to flag based on the notification date for the reminders. And at that point, when you log in, the software will start to try to automatically send emails for specific reminders for you. It will also allow you to, if there are scheduled reminders, can actually look in the system. And if you search by notice date, you can check to see if a reminder email has been sent. And if you want, you can right click and say resend reminder email. So the next time I send emails, that will flag out and send an email to that particular template in there. I am actually going to go in and delete that template because I don't think that person wants to get a reminder email. But that's going to allow you to set it up so that individual people can be flagged and get notifications for different types of service. Another way that you can manage this in a more proactive way is that in the reminders module, you can set a variety of automated search options, which will bring this kind of stuff up for you. So everybody's user profile has the ability to set default searches. So in this case, what I could do is say, okay, if my responsibilities in the module primarily lie in terms of inventory, assignment, and service record, I can then go in, run that search with just those types of services. And I can then, in the bottom left-hand corner here, create a new save search, call it JM Reminders, and then right-click on here and say Set Default Search. So what that'll do is whenever I open the Reminders window now, it's going to give me my preset reminder search, the one I wanted. You can also go into the File menu under the option called Preferences and set what modules you want to have come up automatically as soon as you log into FirePro. Very frequently, I set it so reminders are what pops up automatically, so that when you start the program, log in, you get your reminders pop up, and it's your pre-saved set of reminders. So there's a number of different ways to integrate that service notifications into your standard notification process. So that more or less covers that topic. Does anybody have any questions? You can put that in the chat. You can take yourself off mute. Now's a good time to